All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we are on week 5, and we are reading about Percy Shelley's wife, Mary Shelley. And so we're going to be reading a novel this week. It is called Frankenstein. It's one of my absolute favorite novels. It's also my probably favorite reading that I did in college. So I'm really excited to kind of bring that whole experience to you. And I hope that you're going to take the time and do a really good reading of this novel. It's pretty interesting, so I don't think it'll be too boring. Make sure that you do come by my room if you haven't already to check out a copy of this novel with me. It is not in your textbook, so you do need to get a copy of the novel. So before we really go on to talk about what I want you to look for in the novel, let's talk about Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Her mom died in childbirth to her, so she didn't get to meet her. Her husband married about 4 years later, and her stepmom wasn't really the mothering type, and so Mary kind of didn't get along with her, and she really kind of didn't like her at all, but she adored and loved her father. At the age of 14, her dad sends her to go live with a friend of his in Dundee, Scotland, where she gets to kind of roam the countryside wild and free for a couple years. When she comes back in 1814, at the age of 16, she meets Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was like 21 at the time. They kind of have a fling because Percy is kind of away from his wife. He's separated from her and doesn't really talk to her. They're kind of isolated from each other. And so Mary ends up getting pregnant, and they flee to England, or they flee from England. I think they went to France. She gives birth to her daughter prematurely, who unfortunately does not survive. In 1816, though, she does have her first son, William Shelley. And then the last 6 years of Mary's life with Percy are pretty disastrous, and it's tragedy after tragedy after tragedy for her. So it's pretty tragic. In October 1816, her half-sister commits suicide because she can't take it any longer. 2 months later, Percy's wife, Harriet, committed suicide in a bathtub. And so Mary and Percy kind of immediately marry, but the courts refuse to give Percy custody of the kids that he had with Harriet. So they're pretty devastated about that, especially since they don't really have many children because they haven't been able to. In September 1818, Mary's third baby passes away, and 9 months later, her son, the only surviving child that she's been able to give birth to, also passes away. So she's left with no children and nothing, and she sinks into a pretty deep depression that is alleviated slightly by the birth of her second son in November 1819. But then she has another miscarriage the next spring, and she sinks back into that dark place of depression. Percy Shelley drowns in July of 1822, and she kind of berates herself because she feels like she was not there for her husband whenever he needed her, and she let him down. And so in her desire to rescue this character of Percy that has been kind of torn apart because of, him leaving his first wife and abandoning her with their kids and stuff. So his character has been really assassinated, and people aren't reading his poetry, and they're not big fans, I guess. And so in her desire to rescue the character of her husband and provide for her son, she becomes an extensively successful writer in the last quarter of her life. She writes lots of stories, more novels, journals, etc. She becomes extremely successful and does a great job for herself and provides a great life for her son, which is really the point of it all. At age 58, she does pass away, but she leaves a legacy behind, miles long. Excuse me. Okay, so let's talk about Frankenstein. Frankenstein began as a short story with Mary, Percy, Byron, and they were kind of sitting around a campfire and they decided to tell ghost stories. And they were like, well, who can tell the best ghost story? There were some other people there too, but I'm not going to name them. And so she comes up with this idea for Frankenstein and they loved it. And they said, well, you need to adapt that into a novel. You need to keep going with it. So she does. And now we have this fabulous novel that is both horrific and beautiful at the same time. So what makes this story a romantic movement story? And these are some of the traits and elements that you're going to find. The idea of going to faraway lands, using the word imagination throughout the story. You're going to see that word over and over and over again. The idea of solitary, of being alone, the idea of going on a journey, this quest for self that is so key in the romantic movement. What I want you to really keep your eyes open for are when things happen. When is the monster alive? In winter, in November, at night. When is Frankenstein well? In the springtime. I want you to really kind of think about those elements. I also want you to think about the way that nature is used throughout the novel. That's pretty key for this novel, but also for the romantic movement period. And do you think that Shelley is questioning any of the romantic elements? And if so, which ones? What do you think she's doing to show that kind of questioning it and kind of not really agreeing with it and thinking it's kind of silly? And then her use of imagery is just beyond anything that you're going to read elsewhere. And I really want you to look at how she uses imagery to paint this picture for you. Next week, we will discuss this reading in class, and I will post a video lecture discussing the same things in case you aren't in class that day, but I want you to have that before you take your exam. If you have any trouble with this book, which I don't really think that you will, but if you do, or if you have trouble with the writing assignment, please contact me or come by and see me, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. In the meantime, happy reading. You do have a writing assignment this week that I would like you to do. If you need a little bit of extra time, just contact me and let me know. You can't go too far over, but if you talk to me, we might be able to make some kind of arrangement. But I will be posting that discussion on Monday, and then we'll also discuss it in class. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will get back to you right away.